My name is Kayla Spelling. I'm a Kentucky girl with wild hair and green eyes who's not just a photographer and videographer, but a midnight designer too. I'm a visual storyteller with a creative spirit that knows no bounds. As a creative junkie and Aquarian sun, my love for all things creative runs deep. Being a visual storyteller for over a decade has allowed me to work with some seriously impressive clients across all spectrums, fueling my desire to learn and explore how people experience the world. What do they have in common? They all live and breathe their passions. So, inspired by their experiences, I launched a podcast to hear theirs and other stories on how they broke the 9-to-5 mold and pursued their true purpose in life. My goal is to empower listeners with knowledge and inspire them to live their most authentic and fulfilling life by following their passions. Join me on a journey where we'll explore spiritualism, consciousness, writing, culinary arts, tattooing, music, travel, media, and so much more. As an Aquarius, I know that I'm full of surprises, but one thing's for sure. We're in for a crazy journey into this world of creative junk. Welcome back, my creative junkies. Get ready to be inspired as we dive into captivating conversations with extraordinary individuals living out their passions. Today's episode is truly inspiring as I sit down with my client, Chris Oledude, an artist dedicated to fighting social injustices. Trust me, he has some incredible stories to share. His music is truly inspiring, addressing the pressing issues of our time and serving as a true voice for our generation. I first met Chris back in 2019 when he needed a web designer for his new creative venture, a creative agency called Artivistas. The mission of Artivistas is to leverage the transformative power of art to raise awareness, stimulate dialogue, and ultimately drive significant social and structural change in America and beyond. In today's society, the creators of meaningful art focused on social justice and the environment often go unnoticed compared to more popular artists. Chris, a songwriter and political activist himself, founded Artivistas to empower talented individuals whose work deserve great attention at local, national, and international levels. I was thrilled to contribute to the creation of this venture and to learn more about Chris during our client meetings. His journey and the passion that he brings to his work have truly been inspiring to me, so I can't wait for you guys to hear what he has to say. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about Chris. Chris has had a diverse musical career, performing solo and with his own bands and collaborating with other singer-songwriters and choruses. Following significant personal losses, Chris formed OBB, the Owens Brothers Band, in 2014 as a tribute to his late father, Congressman Major Owens, Nelson Mandela, and Pete Seeger. In 2019, after losing his wife to cancer, Chris realized the need to create new lives rather than letting COVID-19 terrorize and take lives. Additionally, with the dominance of the internet in the arts world, Chris wanted to differentiate himself from the countless other performers named Chris Owens. Thus, Chris Oledude was born. Throughout his career, Chris Oledude's music has blended original melodies, compelling rhythms, impressive solos, and meaningful lyrics, creating powerful and memorable songs. Tracks like Man o' War, If a Woman Had Made the World, and Love is the Way deliver impactful social messages while still being danceable. Okay, no more bias. Let's jump into my chat with the incredible artist, Chris Oledude. Chris, welcome to Creative Junk. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. And I think I've just been excited for this interview because of really what you stand for as an artist and working with you because you're a client of mine, but which started out as just a website job, but then like really diving into the nonprofit and really what you're all about and with your mission and stuff, it really honestly was really touching for me. And it made it impactful for me to actually create the website for you and for your artists and stuff like that. So I can't wait to share about that and just all of the work that you're doing because you do so much.
Too much sometimes, but thank you, Kayla. I appreciate that. Just one little correction there. Ain't nothing I'm doing right now nonprofit.
Oh, okay.
I work with nonprofits on other things, but my particular projects are not nonprofits. I just want to
Okay.
clarify.
No, thank you so much for the clarification on that. I really want to start kind of like in the beginning for you, because the way that I first was introduced to you, besides through the company we'll be talking about in a little bit, you are a musician. And so I'd love to know a lot about that, just kind of like your background with that and how you got started, what inspired you to even get into this path of being an artist, basically.
Well, as is so often the case, it starts with mom. And the reality is that my mother was an extremely musical individual. She loved music. She had learned musical instruments when she was younger. She actually was into conducting. Her passion was classical music, and that had its ups and downs in terms of how I grew up. But the reality was she was open to other things and eventually became a lover of the Beatles, although it took her a long time to love other things as well. So the Beatles and the Jackson Five and Bach and Mozart and Beethoven were all fine, as well as Paul Robeson and Pete Seeger and other, progressive folk singers who she had basically been raised with for all essential purposes. And she was my piano teacher. She was my first music teacher. My mother taught piano. She started with my brothers and me. She expanded her teaching to the local community. She was like the piano teacher in the neighborhood type thing, and you don't realize that until like 30 years later. I'm running for political office and people are coming up to me and saying, "Are you Ethel Owens' son?" "Yeah, she was my piano teacher. How is she doing?" I said, "Well, she's standing right over there."
Thanks, Mom. Thanks for the help.
Yeah, exactly. So that was she was actually a vote getter in her own right. But I always loved music. My mother said that I used to stand there, as a baby listening to her play the piano. And when I was 5, I walked over to the piano and kind of hit the keys and realized that what I was doing didn't sound like what she was doing. So then I refused to touch the piano again for a long time. But I loved listening, and I would sing and dance, etc. Like, most kids really have so much music in their lives and the desire to express and connect with music. And it's a tragedy that, at least in America, we do a lot less connecting to music than we should. And when I say that, I don't mean just listening to the radio. I mean connecting to music in a deeper way. My actual first music lessons, before even my mother, was when I went to a school. It was a YWCA in Manhattan, and I went to sessions there. I must have been 3 years old, and the teacher would put out hula hoops around the floor, and each hula hoop represented a step in the scale, and she would play an interval. And, all the hula hoops were numbered, and the children had to jump from hoop to hoop based on what they heard. And when you think about that, for a 2 or 3 year old, that's not an easy thing to do. Or maybe it is an easy thing to do, and we just never have tapped into it. But according to what I've been told, I was perfect every time. I could hear thirds, fourths, fifths, even sevenths, and was able to jump to the right hoop. So at a young age, it was evident I had an ear. And then after my mom started me on piano, the next thing she started me on was the recorder, which, in New York City, which is where, I live in Brooklyn. Well, I don't live in Brooklyn now, but I was raised in Brooklyn. In school, children were given instruments back in the days, in the 60s. And one of the instruments you were given was a recorder or a tonette. And of course, once you got that, this is what you had to do with it. Well, exciting as that might sound.
Hot cross buns, yeah. Woo!
It was definitely not that exciting for most kids in the class who found it to be quite tedious. Well, so did I. And I was fortunate enough, because my mother was a musician and wanted me to learn more, to get recorder lessons in a different environment where we actually were playing Renaissance music and other sorts of things. So I learned how to read the G clef at least, and and play more. And then years later, because I also studied cello and I played the clarinet and African drums. But years later, in the summer of 1975, now granted, I'm dating myself. I know I look so young and beautiful for my age, but I'm old dude for a reason. The summer of 75, I was 16. My brothers and my mother and I were traveling to Mexico. We were driving to Mexico from New York. So it was a long drive. And we drove through Mexico as well. And we found that the radio stations that we had to listen to were very, very boring. They ranged from country music, which at that time was very twangy and not something we were into, to Spanish stations, because there's feeds coming from Mexico and the Southwest, or religious stations, preachers.
Oh my.
Yeah, lots of them. And so we were, we didn't like what we listened to radio. So my brother, Jeffrey, who's 2 years younger than me, had fallen in love with the Beatles. He had taught himself guitar. He also played the viola, taught himself guitar, and he brought his guitar with him in the car. And he would start playing the songs. And my other youngest brother, Mitty, and I would sing harmonies. He'd sing melodies. We'd sing the harmonies. And my mother was happy as a pig in slop, while we were driving, listening to that. But of course, if you're playing a Beatles song, there's inevitably a spot where there's a guitar solo. And of course, Jeffrey couldn't play both the chords and the solo. So of course, what did I do? I filled in on the solos with the recorder. And that became actually a shtick for us. We started playing together Beatles songs this way. And when we traveled in the summer of 1977 to Greece, which was my last year between high school and college, my brothers and I literally made money playing Beatles songs at restaurants in exchange for dinners and cash.
That's so cool.
On our trip. And, people are like, oh, well, what is this instrument? I was like, this is the recorder. It came from Europe. You all should know it. But they all had different kinds of flutes, and various wind instruments in their areas. And someone said to me, well, what's your favorite song? And I said, well, I have no one favorite song, but if I want to show off my recorder playing, then I play the guitar solo from Stairway to Heaven. And they look at me like, what? What are you talking about? And I said, well, just listen. That kind of thing. And that kind of blew people's minds because they weren't used to hearing recorders played like a rock and roll instrument. So that's how I got started in music before I really took it seriously as a potential profession.
And how many instruments in total do you play, and what are those? Well,
what I play now is mostly keyboards and recorder for solos, and accompaniment, different keyboards, because, it's electronic now. Who can put an acoustic piano in your apartment? Nobody has the room, and they're very heavy to carry around, so you're not going to take them to gigs with you. But I did play, and I love to play and would one day like to play again, the cello. I played the clarinet, which, was an easy transition to some degree because of the recorder. You already were used to putting your fingers down on holes, but it has different intervals and the reed and all that stuff is different. So I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I studied, my brothers and I all studied African drumming with Michael Babatunde Olatunji, who was a very famous Nigerian drummer who basically brought African drumming to the United States in a formal way. It was always been part of Black culture, but people didn't talk about it as African drumming. And when Olatunji brought his music and then recorded an album called Drums of Passion, that kind of exploded. It was the early 60s and it kind of exploded and everybody was like, oh my God, listen to this music. So he opened a school in Harlem and we attended that school for a while and learned congas and other instruments. So I do some percussion as well. And I sing. So I would say those are my instruments.
Can you tell me a little bit about your music a bit more? Like, what's your process? I'm assuming, I'm just assuming, you can correct me. Do you write your own music and create that and produce it? And if so, what is your process and what makes your music unique to you?
All profound questions, the questions that are asked of all these musicians. And, they'll go, well, it just sort of evolves from the mind. No, not quite. Not for me. I was always inspired to write music that had a social justice bent. It was either that or lovesick ballads because you were having problems with a girlfriend, one of the two, which is usually, the greatest inspiration for writing songs is, problems in relationships, and that's why people write poetry and essays and letters and poems and lyrics. But I liked writing songs that were oriented towards issues. And when I was younger, I fancied myself to want to be a cross between John Lennon, Gil Scott-Heron, some other people who were known for being social critics. And for me, writing that kind of music started sort of very casually. I had ideas for different lyrics at different times and slowly started putting them together into bigger songs. When I was in college, I was part of a funk band, and we actually did a rap song, the only rap song I've ever really written, the first version of a rap song called My Street that I wrote, which was based on lyrics, essentially a poem that I had started crafting back in 1977 when we had a blackout, a major blackout in New York City, which resulted in looting and all kinds of, terrible things. But the recovery from that blackout was also part of the issue. So I wrote this song, My Street, and it's a mix of, there's a rap verse and then there's kind of a blues sung verse. Then there's a rap verse and a blues sung verse. And then there's, of course, there's the required recorder solo. And then we, go back to the other format. And my process, I realized, was I'd have an idea. I'd try and write some lyrics. I quickly realized I hate writing lyrics. But sometimes the way I perceive something is different from the way everybody else perceives it. So I have to write the lyrics. And since I was raised in the Western tradition, the Western classical tradition, the Western folk tradition, more than any other tradition, from the rhythm of the lyrics usually comes the melody, the rhythm of the melody. And then it's a matter of picking the notes that you want. I'm not a guitar player. And one of the things one might note about guitar players is that they often start strumming chords and then start singing a song over the chords. I'm not that guy. Others do that, and many great songs have been written that way, but I'm not that guy because I'm just not one to sit there strumming chords on a piano. I'm always thinking differently. And so my songs, which folks can definitely, access through www.oledude.rocks, my songs cover a wide gamut, a wide range of topics, but always tend to be very focused on some social matter. The ballads are there too, and I have to record some of those because they're actually not bad. But I've never been good at writing stuff that was designed to be commercial. Whenever you try and do that, it always sounded cheesy. As I get older, I'm more willing to go cheesy because, I've got fewer years left. I might as well see if some cheesy songs will sell. But the ones that move me are the ones that have a message. And those are the singer-songwriters and the artists that I tend to gravitate towards because I respect the incredible songs that so many other people write. Even though I struggle with lyrics, there are other people out there who write incredible, incredible lyrics and create wonderful songs. And they're very unrecognized, but I like to hang out with those people.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that with songwriters. They're definitely overlooked. No one really pays attention to the songwriter, but they have so many incredible stories that they tell. Hey there. I know this conversation is super interesting, but let's take a quick break. Here's a special message from our awesome sponsor. Experience pure magic and rejuvenation with Wicked Obscura, a women-owned apothecary and candle shop in Covington, Kentucky. As one of the owners of this company, I can assure you that we believe in the power of nature and spiritual well-being, which we infuse in every handmade item that we offer. Our candle selection, made of coconut soy and infused with herbs and crystals, give off an unforgettable scent while promoting a peaceful atmosphere. With wood wicks and 100% safe ingredients, our candles provide a touch of magic in every home. Don't miss out on this special offer. Use code CreativelyWicked at checkout to snag 15% off your next purchase and experience the true essence and light of Wicked Obscura. Start shopping now at wickedobscura.com. Use code CreativelyWicked at checkout to snag that 15% off. Music industry, or just focusing on being an artist in general, can be very stressful at times, right? So what are some of the hardships that you've yourself encountered over the years that you've had to work through and have had to overcome?
Well, I would say that the greatest hardship or challenge that any person who wants to be in the music industry has to address is that of acceptance. Because in the old days, and when I say the old days, I mean up until basically the 90s, the mid 90s, you were trying to get acceptance from club owners and record labels and some radio stations, college radio stations, and find a booking agent and audiences. Usually, audiences are the most forgiving. If you do a good job performing in front of an audience, the audience is going to love you. But to get the opportunity to perform in front of that audience requires a lot of selling of yourself. And so getting acceptance, particularly if you play music that is different, is definitely the hardest thing and was the hardest thing. Post mid-90s, when we now are in an age where everybody can have their own record label and everybody can get their music distributed, it's now more trying to get acceptance from an audience, because now you don't have an excuse. There are 100,000 new songs uploaded every day to Spotify. That's an amazing figure. And so there's a glut of material, most of which is not particularly memorable. I won't even say whether it's good or bad. I'll just say it's not particularly memorable. But there's so much of it that in order to cut through the volume of stuff, to cut through the noise, you really have to find interesting ways to do that. And that's where social media comes in. So now the music industry is, unfortunately, 4 parts music, 6 parts social media. And if you don't have somebody really working with you to make sure you are visible and present on social media, it is that much harder to get your stuff heard. Even though it's on Spotify or on Apple, whatever, you have to get people to pay attention to that particular thing. And it tends to be your latest Instagram post that's going to get some attention. Or now TikTok, which is the rage, which I have mixed feelings about. But, all I can say is the industry has shifted. The big record companies are no longer the major players. They're still in the game, and they still make a huge difference for the artists, the few artists that they choose to work with. But now everything's very, I won't say underground, but on the ground. And you really have to hustle in a different way. And that, unfortunately, is reflected in the return on investment. What a song, I'll never forget. I saw a post from Janice Ian. For those who don't know Janice Ian is a singer-songwriter who's a little bit older than me. And she wrote this, she's written many great songs, but she wrote this one song that became her signature hit, and it was called At 17. And, it has lasted through the ages. I think it was released in the 70s or early 80s, wherever. And, people are recording it all the time. And she posted on Facebook, this was about 2 years ago, I saw this post, that she was so honored to learn that her song had been played 250,000 times on radio during the previous quarter, or on streaming 250,000 times during the previous quarter. And she said, no, for a song this old, I'm glad that I'm still speaking to young girls who are going through what I was going through, etc. She said, let me show you how much I earned.
Oh.
And it was, 0.000003 cents, something like that. And I was like, what? That's outrageous. I mean, it's just not fair. And, in Europe and other places, musicians and other artists are embraced. Culture is embraced as a way of making a living. And unfortunately, the American model, which has never fully embraced culture as a way of making a living, even our record industry has defined tastes around the world, but we do not embrace musicians and artists and dancers, etc., as a way of making a living. Unfortunately, our way of doing things has now started to dominate the world's way of doing things. And it's very exploitative and it's very unfair. And for the amount of work you put into crafting a song, particularly if it's a good song, you're never going to, today, if you're starting today, you're never going to make back your investment. If you decide to just go purely commercial and imitate what everyone else is doing, sure, you can definitely make it through. But great songs that aren't just a dance beat with a couple of nice lyrics, great songs are seldom going to make money. So the industry, to me, is what you make it. And one of the reasons why I had to work, I worked a full-time job until I chose to retire from 9 to 5. And now, even though I'm retired from 9 to 5 work, I'm consulting again with a nonprofit organization addressing addiction and mental health issues as an interim executive director, because I need the money to pay my bills and to pay for my music, really. And because the hours that I put into the music are not going to, lead to a certain return. And I do want to prepare all of my music in such a manner that my children will inherit a great catalog, well recorded, and do what they will with it. But I no longer see myself as being the next Michael Jackson. Not that I want it to be. Next Prince. The next Prince. Purple. See, purple.
Yes, I love it. Well, I do. One of the songs that I wanted to talk about that you, and I'm assuming you wrote or you were part of. Can you tell me a little bit about the George Floyd Say Their Names song and video that you put out a couple years ago?
Sure. My honor, and thank you for asking me about that.
Absolutely.
So, like so many people, I was devastated by George Floyd's murder, and in fact, we were seeing it over and over again on TV. It was, very, very impactful. I had already made the decision earlier in 2019. My wife passed away. We were married 28 years. She passed away from cancer in January of 2019. And I had told my boss at that time, the Brooklyn District Attorney, that I felt that unless I could work part-time and reduce my overall stress, I was going to have to leave full-time work in a year when I turned 62. He didn't believe me, but I did. And I started in 2019 thinking about what I was going to do with the rest of my life and how I was going to be a better parent for my two sons and how I was going to make sure that my life was enriched in such a way that the regular stress of living would be reduced. And so by the time 2020 came around, I had already decided that I was going to reinvent myself. So Chris Owens, of which there are many Chris Owenses out there, many famous Chris Owenses, as a matter of fact, Chris Owens wasn't going to work for me. I had to come up with another name. And that's where the Oledude came up. I actually have trademarked the name.
Awesome.
I I looked up Chris Oledude and did a search, and in the United States, there were like no Chris Oledudes, certainly none involved with music. There are some Chris Oledudes in Norway, and there are some Chris Oledudes in Nigeria. Of course, those are Chris Oledudes. But the bottom line is there were no Chris Oledudes in America, and none doing music, none with the name spelt that way, none doing music the way I was doing it. So I trademarked the name, and I started working on a song called My Tower, which was written out of the frustration with the pandemic. And I had a lot of fun with that song and was planning to record it, even though the pandemic was raging. This was now 2020. Pandemic had started. I was planning to record it at a studio in upstate New York, outdoors. So we would be, because there was no vaccine, right? So everybody was afraid of being next to each other. So how are we going to record it in a studio? And this guy had an innovative thing. He would take his cables, he'd throw them out the window, and people would stand around with their instruments and the microphones out on his lawn, and record. And as I was planning that, George Floyd was murdered in May. And immediately, this was one of those situations where it was organic. I immediately had ideas for this song. I felt I wanted to write, I had to write, I had to express my anger, my frustration, as well as the hope that I felt that resulted from all of the demonstrations all around the world, people from all walks of life coming together to protest this, because the murder of George Floyd, I think, spoke to so many people about how you can be oppressed by law enforcement. Whether or not the laws are right or wrong, it's a different issue. But how people felt that they were objects in the face of law enforcement rather than people. And so you saw these international demonstrations, you saw all these demonstrations in the United States, and it was like, yes, this is so important. And of course, Colin Kaepernick, the football player, had already started kneeling, at the start of football games years earlier. And so we were primed. And I was like, okay, I need to write something, because this is one of those moments where a songwriter can rise to the occasion and contribute to the discussion. The words came fairly easily because there aren't a lot of lyrics. It really started with the street chant that had existed for many years in these situations: no justice, no peace. And I had participated in other demonstrations. I was arrested years ago protesting the shooting of Amadou Diallo in New York, and I knew many people that were arrested regularly for these sorts of things and participated in these discussions. My father, who was in politics, was arrested with me in that demonstration, Amadou Diallo, and had also been arrested protesting other things, including international issues. And so the No Justice, No Peace chant, which was popularized, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement were already there. Again, everything was primed. So the phrase that I then borrowed from Reverend Al Sharpton, of all people, and that's a whole other story for another time, was, get up off of our necks. And so I felt this rhythm, get up off of our necks, which of course, Black folks tend to be rhythmic when we come up with ways of expressing language. So No Justice, No Peace has a rhythm, get up off of our necks had a rhythm, and I Can't Breathe, I then combined with Get Down, Lie Down, I Can't Breathe, Get Down, Lie Down, I Can't Breathe, Get Up Off of Our Necks. No Justice, No Peace. So the lyrics are not that, the main lyrics are not that complicated. And then there was the concept of what perspective do I use for this? And I tried to take the perspective of Black women, because more men were getting killed. Not that women weren't getting killed by police, but more men were getting killed than women. And no matter who gets killed, women have been the healers and the rebuilders of the Black community in America. And so I wanted to take more of a Black woman's perspective, and I recruited a dear friend of mine who's a wonderful singer, wonderful songwriter, and also happens to be quite photogenic, to be one of the lead singers on the song. And that's Wendy Ward, who happens to be a retired anesthesiologist. And we met back in 1983, but we've been friends. And she sings on the record, and she's also the lead character in the video. So to make a long story short, I know I'm rambling a bit. The song took shape. I did all the instrumentation on my computer because I wasn't able to use live instruments because people weren't getting together and the technology wasn't there to do, Zoom-based or online-based collaboration yet. So I did everything on my computer with the software that I had. The engineer I worked with helped to enhance the instruments that they sound stronger. And the musical theme that kept ringing through my mind was John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. So the bass line the bass theme that goes through it is a love supreme, a love supreme. You don't hear the vocal because there's no vocal, but the bass is going boom, 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 boom. And then we add various pieces to it, but that's all the way through the song. And the chorus is always singing, George Floyd, George Floyd, George Floyd, George Floyd. Because in this instance, he represents everybody. So I got that. We go up to Woodstock, New York. We're standing on the lawn, and we have some people singing together. And at the end of the song, a young woman who happens to be the daughter of the engineer comes over to me. She's a high school student. And she says, Chris, I love this song. And if you ever do a video about it, I want to help you do the video because I make videos. She was a senior in high school. And I looked at her and I was like, well, I honestly hadn't thought about doing a video because I don't know anything about videos, but you're on, So here's this, 17-year-old, just turned 18-year-old white chick from the suburbs of Albany, New York, working with this 60-something-year-old black guy from Brooklyn. And we're fashioning this video, which now takes on a whole different life because of the fact that we're making a video. So I came up with the idea of having the women do a dance step. I recruited the dancers. They literally had 24 hours. I mean, this was a rush job, filmed in the heart of the pandemic. We filmed it on Sunday morning before people would be out and the cops would stop us. And before we had, that's why so many people wearing masks. And so there was the dance, so we had to have the lip syncing to the track. There was the track itself, which had already been recorded. And then there were the names. And that was the other big thing. I said, well, we're going to name names. And we came up with a list of 64 names. That it's not all of them because there are thousands, but we came up with 64 names and we arranged them and we split them up amongst the voices, and then we had signs made. So all of that is in the video. And I'm very proud of that video because it ain't a pro job, but it's damn good. And the kicker is that we didn't know what to do with it because it's a 7-minute long video, and most music videos are not 7 minutes long. And so we're like, well, who's going to, how are we going to get this distributed? Who's going to see this now that we've made this tool for mobilization? Who's going to see this? And the young woman whose name is Alyssa said, well, I'm not sure, but, somebody said to me that they thought it was, too long to be a video. It was more of a short film. There are film festivals. And I said, really? I said, yeah, I've heard of Sundance. I've heard of the Tribeca Film Festival. I've heard of Cannes, but she said, yeah, there are film festivals. So we started researching. Lo and behold, there are like 10,000 film festivals around the world. I was like, oh my God. And so again, to make a long story short, I ended up entering the video in 600 film festivals, which is a lot of film festivals. The average entrance fee was about $10 when you average it all out, because some of them were very cheap, some of them were more expensive. But I entered into about 600 film festivals, and we were selected out of those 600 plus. We were selected by about 350 film festivals for consideration for awards, which, again, I was very happy. And we won 150 awards, including best short film, best music video, best score, best director, best female lead actor for Wendy. I mean, we won all kinds of things. Granted, lots of little film festivals, but I was like, oh my God. And I think there were two reasons why this happened. One was so many people were tuned in to the issue. It spoke to the audiences at the film festivals. And man, those audiences are mostly online audiences and those judges. But the bottom line was it spoke to them because it was the time. The timing was right. And I think the other reason was that, unfortunately, there was probably a little less competition because the pandemic had slowed everything down for everybody else too. So I think we had an easier time on the competitive side, but at the same time, we were speaking to ears that wanted to hear. And so I'm very proud of George Floyd Say Their Names. I'm very proud of the song George Floyd. And I think that it's crafted in a way that young people and old can see it. It is not an in-your-face, all white people are terrible, all white cops are terrible, although the images, for the most part, are white cops. But it's the culture. It's the blue culture. And that's why one of the lines is, my skin is black and brown, your skin is bullet blue. That's a concept here, that culture of it's us versus them. So that's the story.
Guess what? It's that time again. Time to pause for a moment and listen to a special message from one of our incredible sponsors. Divinely selected places have secrets and mysteries within them that cannot be explained, manifesting as hauntings, spectral entities, and supernatural energies, and are all found around the world in the most obscure corners. Unveil the best-kept secrets of the world with Mysterious Adventures Tours. Immerse yourself in the mystical explorations of curated travel experiences, handpicked by passionate ambassadors and guides. Brace yourself for an unforgettable journey that promises to carve out memories like no other. Satisfy your wanderlust by visiting mysteriousadventurestours.com to learn more about their future tours. It's time to tour the mystery and embark on an enigmatic odyssey that will leave you spellbound. Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts kind of coming to mind when you were talking about this, because I didn't know the full backstory behind the creation of this video. So I'm really touched, honestly. That's such a beautiful and inspiring story of how that just organically all came together. And it's just because you were right. It was the right timing. You were all feeling that emotion at the same time. And it's something it's helping to provoke that dialogue that we're constantly needing to talk about. Because this isn't just this happened and we're going to talk about it for a couple of days and then it's over and we're moving on. No, this needs to be an ongoing conversation. And that applies to a lot of other different issues, of course. But, and then also just thinking about, really art truly is the voice of generations. And I feel especially with this project, that's part of that concept, right? You're speaking, you guys are speaking and singing and, performing about what our generations right now are all upset about, right? And crying about and just wanting to work through. And so just a lot of thoughts. It's a really beautiful thing. And for listeners out there to know, I'm going to put the music video link in the show notes on our website. So then that way people are able to watch the video and experience your short film. So
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
My next goal is to write, and this is much harder because of the topic. My next goal is to write what I would something that I would consider significant, a climate change song worthy of the incredible nature of the topic. Again, I know a lot of singer-songwriters, and they are able to write songs. I mean, they're very prolific. Of course, they've been doing it nonstop for years, but they're able to break issues down into stories, and they write great songs using the story as a way of getting the message through. I'm not that good at that. It's not something that I've had time to refine because I've been doing so many other things in my life all at the same time, even now. So it's hard to refine it down. But I do feel quite compelled. And, as we speak, there's a major hurricane tearing through Florida, and Maui had, and Hawaii had the incredible fires, and there's stuff happening all over the world. It's so evident, it's so clear, it's such an existential threat to the next generations. And there's so many songs already out there, but I need to write something, not just to be part of the discussion, but for myself. I need to sort of let out my own frustration as to how we mess this world up and what we're leaving for my kids. My sons are 26 and 23, and I'm nowhere close to being a grandfather, but I would like them to have the option of having kids who can live in a nice world, and that option is fast disappearing, and that is very upsetting, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this is really actually a great segue into the project that we were talking about in the beginning. Tell me about the creation of the creative agency.
Well, the name of the entity is Artivistus. It is an LLC, so it's basically Chris Owens' alter ego. But Artivistus, Artivistus. And when I was brainstorming with a friend of mine who was sort of helping me organize my thoughts and my future, my friend through whom I met you, Kayla, we were trying to come up with a name, something that would be unique, have some meaning, but be intriguing to people. And, my friend said, well, what are you? I said, well, I'm an artivist. That's what we call people now who are artists engaged in activist work or dealing with social justice issues. This phrase artivist was not around 30 years ago. It's come in the last 10 to 15 years. It's emerged. I can't say I coined it. I didn't. But that's what I consider myself at this point in time, an artivist. And of course, in the spirit of creativity, I said, well, if I put a US on the end of that, I really want to convey the message that we're all artivists. And certainly all of the people I want to work with are artivists. And it also gives it a slightly Latin flavor, which makes people wonder, oh, is this a real word?
Yeah.
So when you hear artivistus, you're like, oh, well, that must be something. No, it's not. It's a made up word. People make up words all the time, right? So yeah, I made up mine. So that was the branding of the name, but the concept of the organization was, I looked around and I realized that I knew these various creative people, some of whom were very close to me, like my brother, who's an actor, and one of my friends who's a singer, who's like a big sister to me. We're all of a certain age, and we don't know how to use social media. And so the work we do is not being seen or heard in the same way because we don't know how to use social media. We don't have profiles online. We don't have ways of doing outreach. And honestly, we're not going to learn how to do it ourselves at this point in our lives. It's too overwhelming. There's too much to learn. There's too much to think about. We need people to work with us and help us. And so I felt that my mission was to identify certain folks, engage them to become clients. I would subsidize a social media coordinator for them to work with them part-time and start building the infrastructure that they needed to increase their appeal, to expand the meaning of their brand in a big way. And we started doing that. And that's, how we met you. And we built everything from the Artivistus website to my website, to Judy Gorman's website, to Laura Ellen McKinney's website, et cetera. And, it was fascinating to learn and to experience this whole different kinds of creative process, because honestly, creating social media content and creating the infrastructure to deliver that content is a whole creative process in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing, and it can be wonderful. I think it gets cheapened when people think of things as, oh, I'm just going to snap this picture and put it on Instagram. That's the cheap version of content.
And
But
I will say, and sorry to interrupt, but I will say too, I think from what I'm noticing, because I also help with social media for clients. And what I've been noticing is that the engagement on social media is also now changing and shifting. People are starting to get sick of the polished posts or just those like kind of setup shots, you know what I mean? Or I think people are starting to see through some of like the fakeness, and they're wanting more of that organicness now. So that's been a really interesting thing to kind of see that shift I would say probably even like the past few months, I've seen this shift take place.
Well, I think that highlights a generational divide. I think it is much easier for younger people to get to that level of informality and spontaneity than it is for us older folks.
That makes sense.
We're not used to doing that. So it's not in our comfort zone. So we're less likely to do it. And even if we do, for example, I've gotten more used to taking selfies. I never took selfies. I still barely take selfies. All right. I like taking a picture of something. It doesn't have to have me in it, but I'm getting more used to taking a selfie. Right. But that doesn't mean I remember to post it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And when I do decide to post something, I am not organic in that regard. I am an artist, which means when I look at the picture, I want it cropped a certain way. I want this, I want that. All the things that you do not necessarily make it a posed set up picture, but I want it to be impactful. And so I don't want to just be throwing stuff out there for, and to see what sticks. I want everything I throw out there to be something that's memorable, right? And that means that you end up throwing out a lot less, because it takes time to do all that kind of stuff. But in the end, the creativity, and I will say this, because I've been doing a lot of video editing. I use a very cheap software package and manage to throw together videos, not for TikTok and not for Reels so much, but for other projects. But I do a lot of video editing, and as a result, I have even more appreciation for what some people do on TikTok, and what some people do on their various reels. Because even if they're very facile with the stuff, I know that it took time. Somebody had to think of the idea, and somebody had to translate that idea into things and put the pieces together, and that did take some time. Now, they may have been totally motivated to do it, so they stayed up all night, they did it, and boom, it's done. But it took time, and I respect that, and I respect the fact that someone cared enough to do it. There was we had a very unfortunate incident in Alabama a couple of weeks ago, where there was a racial incident. It was very ugly. It was very unfortunate. Should not have happened. And there were a variety of things about it that were both troubling and comedic. Okay. And a couple of people prepared some TikTok videos that I thought were absolutely brilliant. But you could tell it wasn't, they didn't just do this and, hold it up and talk into the phone. They cut and pasted video pieces. There was videos nested within each other. There were captions. I mean, somebody put a lot of work into some of this stuff. And I was like, okay, I respect that. Even if I would not have chosen this event to highlight, I respect the fact that you were motivated to do that, and you used every creative bone in your body to come up with something memorable. And that was important. And you can see it's memorable. How do we define memorable? If you have 1 million views, it's memorable.
Yeah.
Somebody's remembering it. So, all I can say is that the burden that Artivistas faced when we started was to teach old dogs new tricks. We older folks had to get used to the idea that we had to make our lives more open books, that we had to be less worried about things being perfect. We had to get it. It was more important to get the content out on a regular basis than to make it perfect. Perfection became the enemy of good in this case. And that was very hard for people to do. And in part because they couldn't do it well, the experiment got pulled back because I was spending a lot of money trying to make things happen, and it just wasn't happening. And that's not on anyone in particular. It just was a reflection of where we are and the gap between the generations of how we view things. It also is a reflection of the resources available to creative people. So I was working with a number of songwriters, singer-songwriters. They don't have money to go in the studio to record new material so that we could say, hey, hot new song, hot new this, right? Then you're always recycling older stuff, which frankly had already been on YouTube or whatever, and you're trying to build that up, but you're not giving people something fresh. And so it's important to have your resources in place. And that was one of the problems that I've been dealing with. It's like I'm chafing at the bit to release a bunch of new songs, but I don't yet have the money I need to go in the studio and really record that album that I have in my head, but hasn't been translated into the recording studio. In the meantime, I have done some recordings. I did a 2-hour concert, live concert that folks who subscribe to my website, when you get my newsletter, you get a link so you can see the entire concert for free. If you join my Patreon, you can see the entire concert for free. But there are 13 songs on there with a 16-piece orchestra. And that was a lot of fun. Granted, we only had 2 rehearsals, so, it can always, you listen to it later and say, oh yeah, that could have been better, that could have been better. But I had a ball. It was my birthday. It was a birthday concert. They had a ball. It was in the middle of the pandemic. We were so happy to be together in one room, seeing other people live. It was a great experience. But that's not the same as going into the studio and laying down the music exactly the way you want it. It's not the same as pursuing perfection as opposed to settling for good, right? So I'm still pursuing perfection for some of my songs, and I'm getting new ideas. I'm trying to be better about writing down stuff so I can write more songs more quickly. But for the other artists that I was working with, I'm still working with some of them in the way I was before, where I subsidize some portion of what they're doing. But they've learned now that they've got to generate more of the content on their own. And some of them are able to do that, and some of them are not. And that's and they're doing okay. I mean, again, we're all older. So our lives are not dependent on mastering this. It just would be nice to see these folks who are older, who have great material, get the recognition that I feel they deserve, because I believe the audiences are out there, particularly since people our age are now the majority of the population in the United States. But the audiences are out there. But if you can't reach them, it's like, what if you make the call, but the call doesn't go through? It's that kind of situation. So Artivistus is a grand experiment. It still exists, mostly focused on me. But if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would call up every one of my former artists and say, hey, we're back in business.
Absolutely. Well, and so you did mention your Patreon, and so I'll definitely make sure to put that in the description as well for people to help fund you and support you with all of the things that you're creating. And so you kind of talked a little bit about it, just like you do have some songs that you have been working on. Are there any other projects or anything that you want to share that you've been working on or a part of right now?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, I'm very involved with other nonprofit community-based work, even while I'm doing this other stuff. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I'm a member of a ministry at a church that is dedicated. The ministry is dedicated to helping folks coming home from prison, and that was the work I was doing in my last full-time job. And I worked with them then, and I just continue working with them now, and that's been very, gratifying and inspirational. I'm an advisory board member for another group that tries to bring music into the prisons, as well as helping individuals as they come out to reconnect to music if they were musicians beforehand, and that's been gratifying. I have some other nonprofit involvements as well. The People's Music Network for Songs of Freedom and Struggle is a collection of folks who all across the United States and Europe and some in Australia who are singer-songwriters, folk singers, social justice singers. This group was the group that inspired me back in 1984 when I first was exposed to them. This was the group that inspired me to be a social justice-oriented songwriter. It included Pete Seeger, who was a family friend, and a variety of other people. And I met Judy Gorman through People's Music Network. And then here in New York, the People's Voice Cafe, I'm a member of the publicity committee, and we do performances every Saturday between September and May of artists who do social justice-oriented music, indigenous music, etc., spoken word. And so these are all projects I'm involved with, which I enjoy. But I took on two more, three more. Well, one was to pay bills, right? I mentioned I'm working with a nonprofit to pay bills. But I joined two bands, not one, but two bands in order to sort of, and there was a very definite purpose behind this. One band focuses on original music, although right now it's original music by a bunch of other people, not me at this time, but there'll be some of my songs coming through there. And the other band focuses on covers, on cover tunes. And the purpose of each band was different. The purpose of the original band was to get back in touch with live sound and hearing how original tunes come across to audiences through live presentations. Granted, that's not my goal. My ultimate goal is to have great recordings, but you want to be able to play for people, and you want to get a sense of what it feels like to play original music, songs that people haven't heard before or may only know a little bit. And that was the genesis behind that for me. And the other one was a brand new band that I started with the bassist from the original band, focusing on covers. And for me, that was more about making sure that I was used to being in front of audiences, but building more of my keyboard chops. I am what I call a rhythm keyboard player. I play chords really well. I play rhythms really well. I'm not your soloist. I'm no Keith Emerson. I'm no Rick Wakeman. I'm not even your average jazz pianist. I can fake a solo, but I'm not a soloist on the keyboard. I can do a good solo on the recorder, but recorders and cover songs don't always go together that well. So I was like, you know what? The best way for me to be motivated to work on improving my piano keyboard chops is to be in a situation where you need to deliver. You need to deliver some solos. You need to get that rhythm making. You have to blend with a group. And I remember when I was younger, when I was in high school, I was in the All City Orchestra here in New York City. I played cello in the orchestra, as did both of my brothers in later years, played their instruments as well. There was nothing, people say, wow, I just get high off of this, off of that. I get high off of playing music with people. I felt so good playing in that orchestra, even though I was in the back of the section. That connection, while you're creating some awesome piece of music, there's nothing that compares to it. And I love singing in choirs because there's that connection. You're blending and you're creating something and making a joyful noise, that reaches out and grabs an audience. Those experiences are experiences that I love. They gratify me more than anything else that I can imagine through music or professionally or anything like that. And so being in bands is something I've always enjoyed. It's just a lot of work. It takes up a lot of time to prepare the materials, to do the rehearsals, blah, 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 and it costs some money too to go to rehearsal spaces. But that's why I joined these two bands, so that I could become a better musician and become more sensitive to the things I needed to think about as I was getting ready to record. How are live audiences going to respond to my music? And so I'm enjoying that. And I do at least 2 rehearsals a week, one with each group. We have our debut gig for the original band, whose name is 15th Street, is on September 9th at a local bar in Brooklyn called Freddy's Bar. And then on November 3rd, the cover band, whose name is Beyond Blues, both of which you can find on Facebook and both of which have websites. Sorry, they were through Wix. Both of the Beyond Blues has its debut on Friday, November 3rd at Connolly's 45, which is on 45th Street in Manhattan. So, these projects are not going to make money. They are designed to help build the connection and the excitement around live music and performing, and also helps identify songs that really are good. And you learn from that as a songwriter. You're like, yeah, there's something about this song that really works. I can use this approach in this song and whatever. And so that's the story.
Well, for listeners out there who need some advice and an inspiration regarding picking up a hobby or tapping into a passion that they have, whatever that may be, whether it's, they're interested in picking up an instrument and playing or drawing, whatever that is, what can you say to them to kind of help inspire and encourage them?
First and foremost, if you love it, do it. Don't worry about whether it sounds good or looks good or whatever right away. If you love it, do it. Because the more you do it, the better you're going to get, the more comfortable you're going to be, the more you're going to find your own voice and your own way of doing it, so that it starts becoming something special and interesting. Just because everyone else is doing something a certain way doesn't mean you have to. And as I think we've already alluded to in this conversation, being different has value, and being different is more interesting. It's funny. There was a quote I read in some publication. I don't remember where it was, because, there's a lot of discussion now about AI, how artificial intelligence is going to steal. And believe me, there's reason to be concerned about what AI can do to exploit and destroy a lot of the creative impulses that we have in our society. But this particular person said something that I thought was so important. He said, all AI is the aggregation of everything that's out there. And since most of everything that's out there is mediocre, most of what AI is going to create is going to be mediocre. So if you're different and you're special, do your thing. Don't worry about AI, because AI is never going to be you if you're different and creative. And I was like, yes, yes, that makes so much sense, because too often, and this is, happened for decades, you hear a song on the radio, I want to sound like the song on the radio. All right. Yeah. There's something to be said about, I want to make people dance, but that doesn't mean that your songs have to sound exactly like everybody else's songs. And we've seen that over and over and over. Every genre has its copycat syndrome, where all the songs start sounding alike, and I would say, frankly, that the most innovative company, in my opinion, when it came to that, avoiding that, was Motown. Because even though there was a Motown sound and you could hear that snare on every beat and stuff like that, what was going on with those melodies and with those groups and the different, everything, each one was different. When you listen to rock and roll, you got a little bit more copycat stuff going on, when you listen to blues, even though every blues song has all kinds of interesting meanings and double entendres and triple entendres and sub meanings, musically, it's all built around 1-4-5. So, unless you really love listening to blues, after about, 3 hours of listening to songs that sound very similar, you kind of move away from that. But if you can blend and mix stuff together and make it exciting, you will not be a victim of AI. So for those who are looking to get started, be you, love what you do it again, keep doing it, be original, don't be afraid to use your voice. And most importantly, it's never too old. You're never too old to start.
Oh, that's so perfect. Chris, I just want to thank you, not even for just being on here and talking to me, like being vulnerable and talking about these things, but thank you for just even like the art that you create, the work that you do, all of the, different organizations and stuff that you help with and work with. And again, just the art that you create and helping other artists. It's really beautiful. It's really inspiring. And so I don't know how often you hear that. So I'm saying thank you for what you're contributing. So
I don't hear it. I don't hear it enough. So thank you for saying it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So, Where can people find you? So like if you are, if you have any live shows or music on the airways, anything like that, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, first and foremost, you can find me through two websites. First is my personal website, www.oledude.com, .rocks. Ooh, did I say that .com? Don't go to oledude.com. www.oledude.rocks, ROCKS. It's an unusual name. Maybe I shouldn't have chosen that, but it's unusual and it works for me.
People remember it though, because you're right. It's different. So it's easier to remember.
Exactly. The other site, of course, is www.artivistus.com. Both those sites are built by Kayla. And Artivistus introduces you both to me and the other folks who are affiliated with our organization at this time and the work that they do. So I encourage you to visit that site. I am involved, as I mentioned, with the People's Voice Cafe here in New York. That's www.peoplesvoicecafe.org. And as I said, their shows are every Saturday night starting September 9th. So check that out for some great shows that are coming up. I'll be performing there in January. But there are lots of other folks that are definitely worth seeing. And they do live stream as well as in person. So you don't have to leave your house. You can be in another country and you can see the show. I know, exactly. And you can see it for up to 2 weeks afterwards. So you don't even have to see it that night.
Love it.
Yeah, right. And then I would say that the other organization that I think people would love to get to know better and tap into would be the People's Music Network, www.peoplesmusic.org, because that's really the home of so many great musicians. And there are programs that they host as well, concerts, song swaps, things like that. So if you are a songwriter yourself and you're interested in social justice or just folk songs or whatever, it's a great resource for those places. As far as live performances, for me, September 9th, Saturday, September 9th in Brooklyn, New York at Freddie's Bar. The band is 15th Street. And then on Friday, November 3rd at Connolly's 45 in Manhattan in New York City, the band is Beyond Blues. And that's a 10 to midnight show. So come prepared to get drunk and party.
Yes, come see him live. That's awesome.
That's right.
Well, Chris,
That's right.
Yes, again, thank you so much for being on here, hanging out with me, letting me interrogate you, asking you all kinds of questions. But it's always a pleasure getting to hang out with you and talk creative things, because we do. We always talk about creative things and what we're inspired by. And yeah, so love it.
Cool. Well, thank you, Kayla, for having me. And I certainly wish you all the best with this project. One of my secret dreams, and I'll share it with you right here now. One of my secret dreams is to have an online radio station that focuses on social justice music. And so I'm watching people like you who are grappling with the challenges of online productions and creating new stuff and getting heard. And so I can learn from you. And I admire what you're doing. And I wish you all the best so I can benefit from it too.
Yeah, I'll go through the growing pains for you. So then that way, when you're ready to go, then I can tell you what not to do.
Right. There we go.
That's how it works. Well, have a fantastic day. And everybody out there listening, please check out Chris's music. It's awesome and really enjoyable. And definitely give a watch to the George Floyd Say Your Name music video or short film, however you want to view it. Music video, short video. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Seriously, this was awesome. This podcast is brought to you by Mindjunk Creative, a creative agency that creates brands and experiences rooted in visual storytelling. By exploring your Mindjunk, Mindjunk Creative is able to tap in and explore all of your wild ideas that you may have viewed as throwaways and use them to create engaging stories and experiences for your brands. What's your story? Go to mindjunkcreative.com and follow them on Instagram at It's Mindjunk. Give a huge shout out to Chris for an awesome chat. Ready to dive into your next creative venture? If you love doing it, don't hesitate and just go for it. Click the links in the episode description and show notes on our website at creativejunkpodcast.com to connect with Chris on social media and explore his website. Keep coming back to our website for the latest updates on our incredible guests on Creative Junk. And if you haven't subscribed yet, well, what are you waiting for? Find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, just any of your go-to platforms. Leave me a review and share it with your friends. I'll seriously be forever grateful. Have any thoughts on today's episode or must-hear stories? Hit me up at hello@creativejunkpodcast.com. I really do love hearing from you all. So until then, catch you later, folks. Did you love this episode? Well, let's continue the chatter on Instagram and Facebook. We can dish about the latest interview and catch up on all things, well, creative. Plus, check out creativejunkpodcast.com for show notes and other juicy resources to satisfy your creative cravings. Don't miss out on the fun, and hey, thank you for listening.